Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a Friday episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Demhauser. Excited to be with you here. We got a fun show on this still sunny Friday morning. I think the rain is about to return to the Northwest. I'm sure you guys are excited by my continual weather forecast, but the truth is, if it's sunny, I got a smile on my face because this is the best time of year in the Northwest. I like it personally even better than the summer. I like it when it's in the 60s, low 70s, and crystal clear skies and beautiful clean air to breathe and get out and experience it. So good time to be in the Northwest. But yes, the rain is right around the corner. A lot of stuff to cover today. We're going to welcome in one of our favorite guests. Ryan Fowler of the Draft Network will join me in about 15 minutes. So looking forward to talking to him. We are just a few days away from the NFL draft, and Ryan is as plugged in as they get about what's going on with different players, prospects, teams. So we will talk about, specifically, I want to talk to him about some of the real pivot points of this draft and where we could see all sorts of different players going to different teams that could absolutely impact who falls to the Seahawks. So we will talk to Ryan here again in about 15 minutes. And before we get to that, I have some news to share that I think is pretty cool about a little birdie told me around Cooper Kupp and what's already going on over there at the VMAC. So I'll share that here in just a second. And before we get to all that, you hopefully will notice a new hat. I think everyone's been tracking my hats. Even one of my friends was like, "How many friggin' hats do you have, dude?" And if you saw the pile of hats next to me, it's a big pile. I like hats, and when you've got my thinning hair, hats are a much better thing to look at for most people. But the hat, for those that are listening and not watching, is a primetime Ben's Fund hat designed by the one, the only Ben Schneider, John and Tracy's son. And that is because last night I had a really fun time at what's always a really special event that the Schneiders throw. They've been doing it for pretty much since they got to Seattle. It's been a very long time, since I think 2012, I want to say. Maybe it was 2011, but I think at least 2012. And it's a charity event. It's an auction that benefits Ben's Fund. And for those of you that don't know what Ben's Fund is, there's probably only a small section of you that don't at this point, but just in case, John and Tracy have a son, Ben Schneider, who has autism. And my youngest son, Nate, also has autism. And so it's been a really cool thing that we have kind of connected on. And what John and Tracy started with Ben's Fund is this charity that helps parents that can't afford really expensive autism treatments. And this can be things like behavioral therapy. These can be things like iPads that some autistic folks use for communication. It can be all sorts of things that are assistive to people with that are autistic that wouldn't otherwise be able to get them because their parents can't afford what are often pretty expensive treatments. And they have raised over $5 million over the years, and it's involved different Seahawks players, coaches, executives, all sorts of folks have participated over that time. And it's been cool to watch it kind of evolve over time. I would want to call out Sarah Rutke and Connie Kate, who do an amazing job organizing this event and just put in tons of hours to make it possible. And this has been the primary charity that Hawk Blogger and associated shows that we've done, podcasts, blog, all the stuff has generally gone to charity until last year, where I also made this my job. So we do more than just donate to charity now. But we made our latest donation last night to Ben's Fund, over $6,000 to Ben's Fund last night, which brings our total to almost $300,000 that we have donated since Hawk Blogger started doing this back in I think we started this in 2010, 2011, where we started making charitable donations. Not all of it's gone to Ben's Fund. Some of it's gone to places like NAMI. We've gone to, some people that, some homeless assistive stuff, people that need food, all sorts of things that we've donated to over time. But most of it has gone to Ben's Fund. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for making that possible. Honestly, none of it would be possible if you guys didn't tune in and support the show as Patreon members, as YouTube members, just as viewers of the show or listeners of the show. So really, really appreciate you guys. And hopefully it feels like you made part of that contribution last night. And I know that John and Tracy really appreciate it, as do all the kids and families in the Northwest that benefit from Ben's Fund. So kudos to all of you. And I do want to take one more quick second to thank all of my co-hosts and collaborators, and whether it's Dana O'Gorman or Nathan Ernst or Evan Hill or Jeff Simmons or Derek Gebbe, Josh Cashman, Braden, who's been helping out around creating content as well as managing some of the channels. And then Will Hart as well, who's been doing the shorts for all the Hawk Blogger Morning stuff for a while. All those folks have donated significant chunks of their time to make this all possible, and they make their efforts are then, seen in these contributions. And this is not the only contribution I'm going to make this year. Last year, we donated over $25,000 to charity, and a lot of that I decided to start spreading out to the My Cause, My Cleats folks. I'm going to do that again this year as well. So once we get into the season, we'll be donating to a bunch of different charities, and just really, really, really appreciate you all. And thank you again to John and Tracy Schneider for a really cool event. So the event last night happened at Lumen Field. It was in the Seahawks locker room. So we had dinner in the Seahawks locker room. It was pretty cool. I honestly, I didn't take a lot of pictures for whatever reason. I kind of felt like, all right, I'm in more quote media now. I don't want to be I don't want them to feel at all weird about whether I'm taking pictures or, capturing anything. So I tried to just keep it very casual, but it was a really cool event. A lot of cool prizes or auction items, I guess you'd call them. And a lot of cool people. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me was a conversation I had about Cooper Kupp. And I think I feel comfortable sharing this. I don't think this is violating any trust, but Cooper Kupp is already showing up to the VMAC every single day, and he's working out. He is grinding. He is legendary in his work ethic. That's already happening. Not only is that already happening, but there are other players in the Seahawks locker room that are following that lead, that had not necessarily been following that same schedule before Cooper Kupp arrived. And I think one of those guys is Jake Bobo. And so while we spent some time yesterday, and it was important to do it with Matt Harmon, if you missed the Matt Harmon show yesterday on Hawk Blogger Mornings, Reception Perception, that was an awesome show. Matt just has a ton of great insights on the receiver position. He looks at it differently than anyone else. And he raised some pretty valid concerns about whether Cooper Kupp is in what he would call a steep decline in terms of his playing performance. Cooper Kupp has been pretty steadfast in saying he doesn't feel like he is in steep decline and would not be playing if he felt like that was the case. Well, he's working his tail off. And if the only thing that Cooper Kupp does, if the only thing that he does is he demonstrates the work ethic, the camaraderie, the teammate that, you'd want him to be for young receivers like JSN, like Jake Bobo, like maybe whoever the rookie is or rookies are that they bring into that room. I won't say that will have been worth 15 million for a year, but it will have been a meaningful contribution to this team. And so I think it's really, really good news that that signing has already started to have some of the culture setting impact that Mike Macdonald, John Schneider had in mind when they made that deal. And I think one of the storylines, one of the key storylines for this season that's going to be different than last season. This is the year that Mike Macdonald sets the standard, that Mike Macdonald creates the culture and identity that he wants. Instead of walking in another man's shoes, instead of like living in another man's house, Mike Macdonald, I think, is going to get out from under the shadow of Pete Carroll this year. And he's going to do it not only with his defensive prowess and coaching and all the things that he's already started to do, but I think we're going to see a coach that really feels comfortable in his own skin without having that kind of hanging over him, without having players that are still hanging on to the past, but are invested in what's happening now and what will happen in the future. And I think Cooper Kupp's going to be a part of that story. I'm eager to see if DeMarcus Lawrence and how he also contributes to that story. Ernest Jones, I think, is a key character in that story. And I think that's all really cool. So good stuff there. I think important stuff there for what's going to be happening with this Seahawks locker room and with the type of kind of lunch pail, lunch box, get there early, stay late kind of culture that Mike Macdonald's trying to create. So good stuff there. Important stuff to hear there. Again, we're going to be welcoming in Ryan Fowler here in just a few moments. We'll talk draft. We'll talk all the stuff going on there. And there's some interesting prospect stuff that I'm still trying to assess where things might be, because I'm going to ask Ryan about this, but there was a good thread from John Ledyard. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but he does, a podcast with Trevor Sikkema, and he has this thread on Will Campbell and how short his arms are. And while we could all decide that, okay, well, he's still a really good player and we're not going to worry about the fact that he's a pretty extreme outlier from his wingspan perspective as a tackle, that you got to be careful about how many outliers you really have on your board. We've talked about this with multiple people, multiple players, multiple coaches. And John goes on to kind of talk about that, Will Campbell's not just has short arms and a short wingspan. He is in the 0th percentile for wingspan for tackles. It is like the amount of tackles that have performed at his arm span in the NFL they don't exist. And this is a guy that is expected to be going top 5, definitely top 10. But is there a chance that he actually is not, and that teams are going to not have him in a situation where they want to draft him that highly? Or maybe they will and they'll have him as a guard. But I think that that's one of these kinds of what's going to happen with this guy? He's clearly a really good player, but those measurables matter in an NFL where just the slightest differences in your physical traits can be the difference between success and failure on any given play. So we'll talk about that with Ryan Fowler in a second. Also, some cool news I want to share as well. So Monday, I will be, at the press conference with John and Mike Macdonald. I've got a bunch of questions I'm excited to ask them. I will also be airing some interviews that I'll be doing, working through that now with the team, but I'm hoping to interview some area scouts, maybe a couple other folks, and I'll be airing those interviews next week. So looking forward to those. We're going to have a lot of great stuff coming out of those conversations. I think it was really cool last year when they had Nolan Teasley and they had the scouts and all those other folks kind of sitting there for a press conference. I wasn't there as a credentialed reporter, so I couldn't ask them questions. I've got a bunch of questions about how they do things, what works for them, what lessons they've learned, how the game has changed from a scouting standpoint. So looking forward to having those conversations next week, and I'll definitely share those with you and hopefully give you a different perspective than maybe you're going to get in other places. And I know you all are sickos like me, looking for all those different kinds of insights that you might not get in kind of standard media. And that should be fun. So I'm looking forward to that. The other piece that I just want to give you a heads up. So tomorrow will be Seahawks Saturday with Jeff Simmons, and then Sunday, it's going to be amazing. The final Seahawks draft roundtable before the draft. We will welcome in Rob Staten and Griff Sturgeon to do our final Seahawks roundtable before the draft. So that'll be Sunday. Looking forward to that. So a lot of great stuff coming. But today we get to talk with one of our favorite draft experts and a guy that I've had a chance to now hang out with a couple times in person and clink the glass to at the combine. So let's welcome in Ryan Fowler to our show. How are you doing this fine Friday morning, Ryan?
I'm doing well, Brian. Always appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, well, it's got to. Is this like a very busy time for you, or is it starting to get quiet?
No, it's we're 6 days away from this thing, Ryan. So it's definitely ratcheted up here to 4th or 5th gear, and it's the best time of the year, because once the draft's over, it gets a little quiet for a little bit, So this is absolutely the best time of the year, and definitely everything's starting to ratchet up here.
What is the thing that you're spending? Like, assuming you're talking to other folks, you don't just talk to me, but besides that, what are you spending your time doing right now?
Yeah, I think right now for even myself over at TDN as one of our senior scouts, it's cross checks. So we're diving back into a lot of the top 100, top 150 guys in this class, making sure we're not missing anything. We've been through this entire pre-draft process now where visits are all completed and all the football. We haven't seen a lot of guys put on their helmet for a long time, but just diving back into a few players to see if we haven't missed anything. And I think for even myself, there's been a couple guys that I've go back into that have really popped a little bit more for my initial watches. So that's kind of really where I'm diving into right now, not making sure I'm missing anything and having a little something on every single guy in this class, whether it's you're a top 50 guy or you're a guy in that late 200 bucket or a guy that's going to be off the board as a UDFA as well.
Well, I got to ask you, who are the guys that have popped for you as on your last or most recent looks?
Yeah, I think it's the big boys up front on the defensive line. This is a loaded class, as you know, Brian, but I think diving back into Tyleik Williams from Ohio State and Shamar Turner from A&M. I said a lot of things about Shamar Stewart at A&M, but Shamar Turner was very, very impressive. Both those guys really in the ground game. Right away what you're going to get from them. And been trying to find more guys early on day 2 that I think can make an impact in the ground game away from Alfred Collins from Texas. And I think both those guys, and Tyleik and Shamar, are going to be in that similar-ish type of bucket where, I think the pass rush repertoire is going to come down the line as far as vertical push type of athletes. But right away on first and second down to clog gaps in the ground game, very impressed with both those players.
Where are you at on Jay Toia?
From UCLA. Yeah. UCLA was they got some players, this year.
They sure do.
They do. Carson and Femi and also, they just have guys everywhere. Even J. Michael Sturdivant was a guy that popped a little bit on tape this year. But Jay is someone, there's a ton of Danny Shelton vibes to him. I think we look at him as one of those Polynesian athletes that, just physically impressive kids. I think he's someone that could go in the late day 3 bucket. I think with him right now, the efficiency with his footwork and his hands don't match up a ton for me. But as far as a gap clogging guy on early downs, potentially in an odd front, I think Jay can absolutely be there for somebody.
Well, we have since we're on this topic, we have a super chat from Ben Kaspersian for you specifically, Ryan. He says, thanks for the show. Can you ask Ryan about Carson Schwesinger and Jahad Campbell and any rumors of them in Seattle and the range where they'll get picked?
Yeah, I don't think that, look, Jihad, I expect him to be the first, if you want to qualify him or classify him, excuse me, as a off-ball backer.
Hmm.
I don't personally. I think his ceiling could come as a pass rusher, Brian. I think he is outstanding as a pass rusher, and he is one of the more versatile players in this class along the front seven. But when you look at Carson, he is a first-round guy for me, and I would be shocked at this point if he does get out of day one for me with Carson Schwesinger as of right now.
Wow.
I've talked to a couple teams, I would say 4 or 5 teams off the top of my head, specifically in the NFC side of things. And a team to watch in the back end of day one out there in Los Angeles, if that gives you any buzz there, was Los Angeles Rams. They have him as their top off-ball backer in the class, and it's not close. So this is a guy that can come in right away and be your green dot in the middle of a defense, someone that runs from number to number, tackles his backside off. And the one thing for me that really stood out for Carson in coverage was he did a little bit too much for me at times, meaning that he didn't need to range into certain zones he just did a little too much where his head's always on a swivel. Just if he tapers it back just a little bit at the NFL level where there's even better athletes around him, I think he really has a chance to be one of the premier off-ball middle linebackers, kind of that throwback type of player that we saw in the past, like a Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner type, of course, in the middle of your defense for a long time.
That's fascinating. That's a lot higher than I would have expected him to go, and we'll see. I mean, this first round, Ryan, how many mock drafts have you done at this point?
I think in compared to the other guys around the industry, not enough. But I think I've done 5 or 6 since the start of the fall.
When you sit down and you do your mock, do you feel like there are four different ways that after pick like 2, it feels like, or pick 3, like it just feels like there's a number of different ways this draft, more so than in past years. It feels very hard to predict. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, 100%. Brian, I wish I could sit here, man, and say this is a guy that's going at 2, 3, 4. Beyond Cam Ward of the Titans, which I'll put my house on that he goes at 1. As of right now, I don't think that's really a secret to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond 2 and beyond, it's going to be a chaotic Thursday night, which I think makes for good business on the NFL side of things. And there's going to be a lot of names that pop into round 1 that maybe aren't talked about. We're obviously names everyone's going to know, but names that maybe aren't talked about specifically when we get to that could be as high as the teens, or it could go back all the way into the 20s. So there is no consensus as far as what happens after Cam Ward. Likely 99% chance goes to the Tennessee Titans, but I'm not going to say it's a certainty until his name is called by the commissioner.
That's the thing that I've just been thinking about this week a lot more, Ryan. We're talking to Ryan Fowler of the Draft Network. There's a lot of consensus on the first round, like a lot of the same names, top 15, top 20, top 25. And yet there's too much like variation in these, and like there's too narrow of a band of talent for it to actually be accurate that these are the guys that are going to go where they go. So it feels like there could be some big surprises and some names that nobody has going that early. I wonder, like at 3, even at 3 with the Giants, what's your current feel? Like there's these different pivot points in the top 15 and the Giants are one of them. Are they going to go Shedeur Sanders? Are they going to trade that pick to a team that wants Abdul Carter? Because they don't really have a great fit for Abdul Carter with Burns and Thibodeau, and they've already got a lot on their defensive line. It makes a lot of sense for them to trade out of that pick.
Yeah.
What's your sense of what's going to happen with the Giants at 3?
Yeah, I think one thing that's very interesting with really the top 10 of this class is specifically with the 2 Colorado guys and Travis Hunter and Shedeur, to where it could depend on where Shedeur Sanders comes off the board is ultimately where Travis Hunter goes. Meaning that, look, if Shedeur goes to Cleveland, and that's, you have Abdul on the board and Travis Hunter, then I think Travis Hunter's the pick for New York in that situation. And if Shedeur isn't gone at 2 and the Giants are sitting there and he goes there, where the heck does Travis Hunter go? So that's very interesting, I think, in the top 5. But I think if the Giants right now, I think if let's just say they stay pat at 3, they have to get a young quarterback. That may come on day 2. There's a ton of buzz with them around a Jalen Milroe or a Jackson Dart, even a Tyler Shuck as well. Or they could wait to day 3 and bring in Kyle McCord. I don't know. We will see, Brian. But at the end of the day, I think if they stay at 3 and they have their choice, which is likely potentially in a Travis Hunter or an Abdul Carter. Let's say if Cleveland, let's just say, potentially takes a Shedeur Sanders. I think it's one of those guys. And I will even say this, you just mentioned Burns and Thibodeau, and they have Dexter Lawrence up there. But I think you don't pass on a guy like Abdul Carter because you have those individuals already in the building. Now, I know you don't draft for need. You try to draft BPA in that situation where the Giants are in right now, where it is this last hurrah for that front office of Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. I don't know if that really moves the needle for drafting an edge rusher, but I think Abdul has a defensive player of the year type of potential. And when I look at both Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, I personally don't see that in both those players. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with the Giants right now, where if it's Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, that's your guys that you really want. I'd be absolutely fine for them because they had a heck of a draft last year, even though all the attention was on Saquon Barkley.
Well, this cracks me up because this proves that we can't agree. Like, there's not consensus. I basically have Travis Hunter as a essential lock to the Browns. It sounds like that's not where you're expecting them to go.
Travis Hunter's my number one player in the class. He is. He's my number one player in the class. And I would say right now, I would probably say Travis does go to Cleveland. The way that Andrew Berry has continued to talk, and I had a good conversation with one of their upper scouts last week that said, hey, look, we absolutely love what Travis does. Right now, we plan to play him on either side of the ball. Not 100% of the time, but we plan to have him in multiple packages on either side of the ball. And I had to sit here right now, I'd probably say Travis Hunter is a Cleveland Brown. But then here goes our conversation of, does Abdul Carter just become a giant? And if he gets past 3, what happens? Is there a team below? Is there a team like the Niners that I think are very interesting to potentially trade up if they really quarter? So we'll see.
That is, we were talking to Ryan Fowler, Draft Now. So we did this a couple nights ago on our show, and that's exactly what I proposed. I'm like, the 49ers have draft capital. Yeah. They are still in their perceived window, whether that's real or not. And it makes a lot of sense for them to move up. Now, my first thought would be that they'd move up for one of the tackles. Maybe they're going to try to get Campbell, or maybe they're going to try to get Membu. But the guy that makes the most sense in some way for them to go and get and fits their draft profile of who they draft early when they have an early pick, it's defensive linemen, it's defensive ends, it's Nick Bosa, it's DeForest Buckner, it's Eric Armstead, it's Solomon Thomas, it's Javon Kinlaw. Like, it's very clear what they do.
Yeah.
And if the Giants aren't going to take Abdul Carter, why not get the 49ers first and pick this year and maybe their first next year? I don't think it's crazy to think the 49ers could do that, go all the way up and get Abdul Carter.
Yeah, and it's also their capital they have right on the day 2 bucket, specifically in early day 3. They have 11 picks in John Lynch's back pocket right now, and they absolutely have the capital to do so. And I think there's obviously going to be trades. We'll see what happens as far as teams moving up, moving back, but you always have to have a trade partner. But I think if Jacksonville's sitting there at 5 and they think maybe they could get Mason Graham below a Jacksonville or further down the board, if the Panthers really want an edge rusher, or the Saints are potentially a spot for an edge guy or a Shedeur Sanders, and they could say, hey, maybe we trade back to 10, let the Niners come up. They're in a different conference than us. Let them potentially get an Abdul Carter. We get more capital. We're still building our roster, even though they have a lot of talent on the other side of the ball. It makes for a whole lot of good business, Brian. It's going to be a lot of fun on Thursday night.
Well, that gets us to the 4th pick, and we're not going to go pick by pick, trust me, because we'll be here all day. But most people have Will Campbell going to the Patriots, and there's a good thread here. This is not new news, but John Ledyard who's on with Trevor Sikkema a lot, going about the fact that Will Campbell is in the 0th percentile for wingspan. And so while it's okay to have some outliers on your draft board, you got to be really careful with those. You and I have talked about that before. Will Campbell at 4 overall as a 0th percentile wingspan tackle at least has to give you some pause. How certain are you that the Patriots will go that direction?
I think it's a great question because I definitely want to provide some context to Will Campbell and really my personal process when watching players. Tape is the biggest thing for me, and I think when you watch Will Campbell, first off, who this young man is between the years. I've had multiple conversations with individuals at LSU. I've had conversations with Will Campbell. This is a young man that you sit in front of This is a culture changer. This is a franchise type of left tackle that you want in the building right away. So from that perspective, it's hard to ignore that type of immediate impact as far as just a leader along your front five at a premium position. Now, also for me, with the wingspan, with the arm length that has really been talked about him for so long, for me, punch timing and hand placement will always supersede as far as the analytics with that. Now, I know it matters, but I think at the end of the day, for me, watching him in the SEC year after year after year, he's not a perfect prospect. He's not a Joe Alt. He's not a Trent Williams. He's not a Jonathan Ogden type of player for me right now. But I think when looking at what I can get right away at tackle, I absolutely would play him at tackle right now. And a young man, again, is going to continue to improve his craft. He's not going to be able to extend his arms another inch and a half. But I think this is a player I'm willing to bet on to play left tackle because of the tape year after year after year in the SEC. Guys, he's going to see at the NFL where he is detailed in his timing and his placement, and the footwork and the eyes match. And I also love the lower half flexibility and the ability to get out in space as an athlete. And then you match that up with who you are and how you're wired in between the ears. And that's a young man that I want in the building. So at 4 right now, I think it's Will Campbell, Armand Membou. I had Membou to the Patriots in my mock because I like the athleticism a little bit more on Membou, but I think it's probably Will Campbell at this point in time.
Well, so there's a couple more of these kind of pairings of, we're going to talk about the team and we're going to talk about the player that's paired with them and what's going to happen with that prospect. And it really is next with Jacksonville. Everyone's got Mason Graham going there.
Yeah.
And Mason Graham's also one of these players that has some less than ideal measurables, less than ideal production in some ways as well, but great tape, solid kid, like all the stuff that you want to see. So is there prospect fatigue there that's kind of causing some people to say maybe he's going to fall a little bit? Or is this the reality and maybe the media has been off on their analysis so far? And I look at the Jags and you've got Liam Cohen, who comes in there and knows that offensive line was such a big part of what they did in Tampa Bay. And they've got work to do. And are they really going to pass on Armand Membou if he's sitting there in favor of Mason Graham? Is he going to want to help his offense more than he helps his defense? What's your kind of feel on what's going to happen there with the Jags at 5?
Yeah, I definitely think, they have positions of need. They definitely need somebody outside of Tyson Campbell at corner. I think there is some prospect fatigue even on Mason Graham's teammate and Will Johnson saying that he can't run. Will Johnson can absolutely run. The tape is he can run with anybody, and the instincts and the fundamental ability as a man corner. He checks off those boxes as far as what NFL teams want, man, and can you run? He does that fine. But for Jacksonville with Mason Graham, you talked about it, Brian. He does not look the part of a guy that looks like a Dexter Lawrence, or even last year with a guy you're familiar with in a Byron Murphy, to where you just look at him and say, that dude is a tank. Mason Graham, he just doesn't look like a guy that's going to be that's a top 5 pick potentially and going to come in and potentially be an all-pro type of player for us. But again, it really comes back to the tape. You mentioned it. In isolation, even at the NFL level, I don't care if he's going up against some of the top centers or guards in football. Blocking him in isolation is going to be a nightmare for anybody in football. So he's going to force double teams right away, which in Jacksonville, but specifically, he's going to open up some opportunities for guys like the Trayvon Walkers and Josh Hines Allen at the edge spot to win in isolation. So that's a really nice spot. And listening to even what James Gladstone, their GM, has said as far as the individuals that they want in the building and those skill sets that they want along the trenches, I do think it's going to be Mason Graham. Could it be someone different? Of course it can. But I think there is some prospect fatigue that is unwarranted, both on Mason Graham and Will Johnson. And I think both players can be really, really good from day one.
So 2 more, and then we're going to go, we'll go a little bit farther afield. So the Raiders, pretty much everyone's got Ashton Jeanty going to the Raiders.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, as someone who's followed Pete Carroll for a long time, I will be surprised if Ashton Jeanty is the pick there. And this is a guy that we know from reports not only tried to trade for Geno Smith successfully, but tried to unsuccessfully also get DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
Why is nobody talking about Tet McMillan going to the Raiders at 6, or any number, if an offensive lineman, if Membou or Campbell slips, or I think Jeanty to me seems like, I'm guessing he's going to end up in Chicago is my best bet. But why is everybody so sure that Jeanty's going to the Raiders?
I know a lot of people out there, including myself, hear a lot of the same things. That name has been tethered to Vegas for a long, long time. I think personally, I like the fit in LA or in Las Vegas, excuse me. I think right away you can just turn around 20 times and hand it off to him and take some pressure off of Geno Smith. But, the offensive line absolutely needs some work as well. And with Ted McMillan, I'll say this. I'm probably, I'll say one of the lower individuals on Ted McMillan around this industry. I still have him in that late teens to 20s type of bucket. For me personally, really in this entire receiver group, I think Matthew Golden is right behind Travis Hunter as far as receivers for me in this class. But I think the Raiders are a very interesting team for potentially a team to say, hey, look, we could also make a move back and just add more talent. Because I don't think anybody right now is saying the Las Vegas Raiders are going to compete in the AFC West and potentially a team that makes it to the playoffs in 2025. I personally cannot say that right now. And on the outside, if you're relying on guys like Jacoby Myers, I know they have Brock Bowers, which is a great addition, but Trey Tucker has made some steps here the last few years coming out of Cincinnati, but they do need a guy on the perimeter. But I think one position that continues the last few weeks that is interesting for the Raiders is still edge. They failed on Tyree Wilson as of right now. I never liked Tyree coming out of Texas Tech as far as he looks the part, but can you play the part, right? And you look like Tarzan, play like Jane is kind of that little, the conversation there with Tyree Wilson. I think Shamar Stewart, as far as a very highly twitched up potential, is all the way surrounded with Shamar Stewart. That's an interesting name there in the top 10 to keep an eye on with Vegas, whether they stay at 6 or they move back a couple spots and add a guy like that. That's a name to know as well. So I'm kind of right there with you. I know Ashton Genty's been the tethered name there for a while. I wouldn't be shocked if it happens, but really, if he does get past there, I'm right there with you that Chicago would scoop him up quickly.
All right, last two on these players, really this is more of a team thing. The Panthers and the Saints. And the Panthers, I think a lot of people have Jalen Walker going there.
Yeah.
I'm still not. I'm not sure exactly. Like Jalen Walker, if he's an outside linebacker and an edge guy, that makes perfect sense. If he's an off-ball linebacker and an edge guy, then I'm not sure I get it. And I also look at the Panthers and I'm like, Bryce Young is going to make or break that franchise.
Yeah.
And they've got no targets for him still. Like there is no targets. Why is nobody thinking about a tight end, one of these great tight ends going to the Panthers? And then with the Saints, you got the Derek Carr stuff. And people are like, oh, maybe Shedeur Sanders ends up there. I'm not sure I can picture Shedeur Sanders and Kellen Moore as like a good pairing, but Jackson Dart, that makes some sense. And is Jackson Dart a possibility as a top 10 player, despite the fact you and I are like, I'm not sure I see it. What do you think happens with those two teams?
Yeah, they are back into the top 10. This is where, things are going to be real fun post number 1. But
yeah,
Saints and Panthers specifically, Brian, because they're in the same division, there's going to be a lot of, if there's calls up, if they want to move back down, similar to when, a couple years ago when Washington traded back, they came up and took Chris Olave. That's obviously worked out for them. And I think with the Panthers right now, Bryce Young took steps. This is a team that went into Philadelphia last year and should have beaten the Eagles if Xavier Legette, doesn't drop that ball at the 1 yard line. But they had some potential there. And I think one thing, even with the tight end conversation, they love Jatavian Sanders. They absolutely love Jatavian Sanders. And they also love what Tommy Tremble can offer as a blocker. So I think the tight end position, maybe on day 2, maybe on day 3, they go there. That's not out of the question. But they got to get a guy either at receiver. If that's Ted McMillan, I'm absolutely fine with that. But also at edge, it really is the Jalen Walker conversation, Shamar Stewart. Do they really like the potential of a Michael Williams, or they really love the production? I know there's some stuff behind the scenes on a Mike Green from Marshall as well. Or I think it maybe could be a guy that really surprises moving up boards is a Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College as well. For me, so is that top 10 a little rich? Most likely, yes. But as far as in this class where, again, there is no consensus, I wish I could just staple that right across my head, just no consensus right here, Brian. But there's just a lot of players that are going to have a lot of buzz, a lot of spots. And with Carolina, it's where he didn't have a single player last year that had more than 6 sacks. You got to get a guy in the building in today's day and age where people are dropping back 30-plus times a game to flat out get after the quarterback and win in isolation. So right now, I do think their focus is at edge. I still like Jalen Walker as a hybrid type of player along a front 7, but they could absolutely sell themselves on his teammate in a Michael Williams, long, big, physical, the tape pops in the Texas games. But overall, the consistency has not been there, but that potential. It can get coaches fired. That word can. but that type of player can be ultimately 3-4 years down the road. We look back and say Micah Williams was really the premier rusher in a class that even had an Abdul.
And then Dart.
Yeah.
Saints.
Yeah, Jackson Dart. 10 is rich for me. 20 is rich for me. Late 20s to the Rams. I know that's been something that's been talked about a lot. The Giants early on day 2, if they do not go quarterback in the top 5, like we talked about a couple minutes ago, is a spot that I absolutely love right away. And I think if he comes into New York and is behind Russell Wilson, there's also a plan there, I think, for ownership and the Mara family to look at Joe Schoen and say, look, we now have this young piece in the building to say this is the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel in the form of Jackson Dart, to where if we play him, let's just say things go haywire the first month of the season, we allow him to sit behind Russell Wilson. There's no way in heck that the New York media and fans will not say, we want Jackson Dart on the field. And if he comes on the field and the Giants win 6 to 7 games this year, because they do have some talent on either side of the ball, and I think it's really, Brian, one of the more underrated rosters in football, in my honest opinion, there's a potential there that he could be the guy moving into 2026 and beyond. So he's not a first-round guy for me, but that early day 2 bucket, I think, is a very, very high possibility comes off the board there.
All right. I would be crazy to not talk to you about the Seahawks, obviously. So 18 overall. Give me 3 names of players right now that you think are going to be realistic possibilities for the Seahawks.
Yeah.
And give me maybe the best possible player to fall to the Seahawks.
That's a great question. I would absolutely love Will Johnson in Seattle to pair as a perimeter corner opposite of Reek Woolen. You know, Josh Jobs was a great story coming out of Alabama and ended up in Philly and then now in Seattle. But 5'11", 190, needs some more pop there at the position because, you know, Devin's in the inside and Reek on one side. I like that. That'd be great. But I think 3 names right now, Tyler Booker, Donovan Jackson, and Gray Zabel. I think right now are 3 guys where they are in the teens. That I think if you're John Schneider and you could have those 3 guys lined up for you, which is a very high possibility, take one of those players and work them into potentially being a Pro Bowl type of player along your front 5.
Any rumors or, prospect visit stuff or anything along those lines that you're hearing about things linked to Seattle or maybe any other teams in the NFC West?
There's a lot going on right now, Brian. I would say with Seattle, things have been, I know they've had a lot of guys in, I know they focused a lot on the Georgia guys, bringing them in for visits, and all the guys, the Jared Wilsons, the Dylan Fairchild, Tate Ratledge. So adding along the front 5 has been something that they've been focused on. I would say away from the Jackson Dart stuff with the Rams we talked about, but really it's been the Niners. It really has been with moving up. You know, there's been a ton of buzz with that, with a really, I would say since the combine. You know, there were some rumblings there in Indy. I know we even sat down and talked a little bit about some stuff there, but I really think the Niners, as far as any of the teams out west, really keep an eye on night 1 to make a move in this situation where they're a team right now that's in a little bit of an interesting point, a pivot point, I think, to where are you going to be a team that's in the NFC West this year, potentially win your division, get to the playoffs, or is this a year where you win 7 games and there's going to be people asking Kyle Shanahan, can you ever get it done? And we're going to try to move on. So they're in a very interesting spot.
Who are the teams ahead of Seattle that you think might be looking at a Donovan Jackson or a Gray Zabel?
Yeah, look, when I look at Gray, he is somebody late first round, I think, because is where I have him. I have him in my mock at 31 to the Kansas City Chiefs. But the ways in which he's been talked about as a versatile type of player, I think are absolutely going to move the needle. I think the Saints are still an interesting spot. Chicago as well with their continued rebuild. Now, I know Chicago's added with the interior, this past year with Drew Dahlman and Jonah Jackson coming in specifically, but they're not away from grabbing a guy in the top 10. I think Donovan Jackson and Gray Zabel are rich, even Tyler Booker at 10, even though I love all those 3 players. So 9 and 10, really, Saints and Chicago. Dallas is still interesting as well, even though they're always about splash. Jerry Jones will always be about splash. So is that a Marion Hampton? Is that a Tet McMillan? Is that a Emeka Egbuka? Is that a Luther Burden? I think that's a team as well that could add one, sure, but they'll probably wait because, again, Jerry Jones is he's all about splash, Brian.
All right, last question for you, Ryan, before I let you go. What's got your attention right now? Like what's something, a player that's moved around, a team that maybe is going a direction that's different than you thought? What's got your attention right now?
I think it's the back end of round 1 as far as team to player fits and these recent visits, just talking with some scouts, specifically with the Eagles. with Washington, obviously, who I was former with in the past, as far as what they're going to do at 29. They love Femi Oladejo from UCLA.
That early?
At 29, they absolutely love him.
Wow.
29. So I am not saying they're going to take Femi Oladejo, but they love the kid. They love the player. They spent a lot of time with him in this pre-draft process. I'll say, I think anybody out there that's have any exposures to Femi, you can't help but be impressed with the young man.
Absolutely.
I think Mason Taylor from LSU, teams absolutely love him. I said this on a show a couple days ago, and I'll say it on here. There are a couple teams that have Mason Taylor as their tight end 1 in this class.
Wow.
It's not Tyler Warren. It's not Colston Loveland. And I'll say this, even that there's a lot of talk in the industry, around the media industry, that look, hey, it's just Tyler Warren, it's just Colston Loveland, and these really premier tight ends. The teams I've talked to more so have Loveland above Warren, specifically as their tight end 1 in the class. But I think Mason Taylor, again, back end of day 1, would not be shocked. He's a guy that goes in the first round. Considering also Trey Amos, and I will say this, I think there's a possibility that we do see 4 running backs off the board in round 1.
That it would be great. As many running backs as possible. Please
don't
let them go to Seattle. So, Ryan, tell folks what they should look for from you and the Draft Network coming up in the final few days before the big day.
Yeah, lots of stuff coming out. I just recently released an 1.5-hour NFL draft preview on my podcast, Commanding the Huddle. I also have player interviews up and down my feed there. Again, that's on all podcast platforms. I'm on X, if you don't follow me there already, _Ryan Fowler. I'll have coverage all throughout draft weekend, including making sure you have notifications on. I'll be getting UDFA news. That'll be ramped up right after the last pick is announced from Mr. Irrelevant. And at the Draft Network, video, audio, written stuff all throughout the weekend. So lots of stuff to come here from myself personally, and then over at thedraftnetwork.com.
Ryan, man, it's always great catching up. Enjoy the last few days, and then enjoy the rest you'll get hopefully after that.
Absolutely. Thanks as always, Brian. We'll talk soon, man.
All right. That is Ryan Fowler of the Draft Network. Great stuff, as always, from him. Man, Femi Oladejo in the first round is rich for me. I really like that guy, but I'm thinking like late day 2, which is like the 3rd round. So if he goes in the first round, that would be wild to me. Really interesting that Ryan had the same read and has been hearing the same rumors. I hadn't heard these rumors, but the 49ers trading up as high as the 3rd pick for Abdul Carter. I'm telling you, like, the logic makes a lot of sense. The risk to reward for the 49ers, like, if you can get one of the 2 true blue chip players in this draft at a position of need, that's a high value position at edge rusher, when you're in what you believe to be your contending window, we can all debate whether they are in their contending window, and they've got draft capital to play with. It's just like the timing of it, the fit of it, it all makes a lot of sense depending on what the Giants end up wanting to do and who ends up falling to that number 3 spot. I wouldn't be shocked. Now, that's the type of trade that can happen before the draft. So this might even happen before we get there. But I'm going to be eyes open for that one. I think the 49ers trading up, if not for Abdul Carter, trading up for one of the tackles or one of the premier offensive linemen, Campbell or Membu, those 2 things feel plausible to me. And really, really curious to see if that happens. Now, the other thing that I wanted to remind folks about, I mentioned it, I think yesterday was the first day, maybe not, but in any event, it is time for the draft prediction show. Draft prediction game. So if you are a patron at patreon.com/hawkblogger, or you are a club level or higher YouTube member, you have instructions now for how you can access this game. It's a Google Sheet. All you got to do is follow the instructions. You create your own version of the draft and then make your prediction for every single pick. Whoever gets the most points, you get 1 point for getting a player name. If you get 25 players right in the first round, even if they're all the wrong pick, you get 25 points. If you also get the exact pick, Cam Ward, number 1, that's 1 point for getting the player picked in the first round. It's 5 points for getting him exactly right at the first pick. And then you also can get an additional 5 points for predicting accurately a trade. And whoever gets the most will win a Real Hawk Talk sweatshirt. So, and plus bragging rights, which is probably even more valuable. So get on in there. Please make sure you follow the instructions. If you don't add your name to the scoring sheet, you will not get your score counted. So make sure, if you have already gone in there, created a sheet with your name, make sure you add your name to the scoring sheet, or else your score will not be counted. So make sure you do that. That's always a lot of fun. 67 Plush, who has been a member for a year. That is so cool. I think that's great. Says free agent acquisitions can pay off well beyond game day. Cooper Kupp and DeMarcus Lawrence are huge ads in this regard. Hoping for more cultural impacts next week. Hashtag Tyler Booker. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt Tyler Booker would be a huge impact to the locker room and a really solid player. I still have real questions about his fit overall for this particular scheme, but if these guys see what they need to see, so be it. There are worse things that could happen at the 18th pick than picking a super high character player who's also a very sturdy blocker in the run game as well as in the pass game, but maybe is a little limited in terms of his mobility and ability to get out on an outside zone. If they feel like he's the right guy, great. But for me, I'm not there yet. So I will not be looking at Tyler Booker for the Seahawks in this draft. He certainly fits previous kinds of profiles for what the Seahawks would look for. I think the hand and glove fit for Tyler Booker is the Arizona Cardinals, and I'm not sure it's going to happen in the first round. I think it could very easily happen in the second round. So thank you again for being a member for 12 months, and thank you for that great super chat. I'm going to take a couple of questions from Patreon because we have a big backup from not being able to get to all of these. So I want to take a couple of the ones that are in there, and let me pull those open right now. So British Hawk asked, do we think the Drew Lock signing means quarterback is totally out of the question for the draft? No, I think I've covered this before. I don't think it really affects the draft at all for them. Maybe it affects their day 3 desires. If there's a guy in day 3 that they think could be a backup quarterback, and that's kind of the high side for them, then they don't really need that now. But if they like Jalen Milroe, if they like Jackson Dart, if they like Tyler Shuck, and they're going to take those guys on day 1 or day 2, I don't think adding Drew Lock has anything to do with that. And John Schneider on his show yesterday said essentially the same thing. Nick S. asks, is there anything about the Senior Bowl that sets up quarterbacks to struggle? Just seemed like they all looked bad, and I'm curious if that's typical of that setting. That's a great question, Nick. The answer is yes and no. So I'll say the no part first. I've seen quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl for years who have absolutely shined. Russell Wilson absolutely shined at the Senior Bowl. Bo Nix last year was very good. Michael Penix was very good. There's a lot of guys that have done well at the Senior Bowl. And so ultimately, I think the answer is, if you're a good player, you're probably going to shine at the Senior Bowl because you're going to shine anywhere. The reason I said yes, it can be a bad setup or a challenging setup is if you're a player like Jalen Milroe or some of these other guys who have never taken a snap under center ever. They've only been shotgun quarterbacks. They've never had their back to a receiver, on a drop back. They've never done a 3-step drop, a 5-step drop. They're only used to taking shotgun snaps. Doing that for the first time with receivers you haven't worked with and coaches you haven't worked with is not easy. And so, yeah, I think it can be challenging. I I still feel like Michael Penix, for example, is just a beautiful thrower of the football. And that just shows up. Even if you can kind of see, all right, he's not quite comfortable with the timing of a drop. He's more used to shotgun. You can still see the arm talent. You can still see the accuracy. It was so bad with Jalen Milroe that there's just really no excuse for it. And that doesn't mean that he has no chance of being a good player. It's just a farther, bigger projection you have to make, and probably a farther distance you're going to have to cover for him to get where you'd need him to go. Good question there from Nick S. Let's see. We've got a question here from, well, this is question. Okay, question. Let me scroll back a little bit and see if I've got some of these other ones. Some of these are for multiple people on the crew, so I'll wait for those. All right. This is from Brandoff. He says, if Seattle drafts Jalen Milroe as a developmental quarterback and gives him some Taysom Hill package type of plays the first year, how much of an upside can he bring to an offense that will sort of change up with that sort of change up? That makes more sense. How much of an upside can he bring to an offense with that sort of change up? Could he be better than Taysom Hill in that role? I continue to see Jalen Milroe and Taysom Hill as very different athletes. I know, like, maybe size-wise, like height and weight, they're similar, but Taysom Hill is like a tank. He is a guy that is built to run between the tackles and break tackles. Jalen Milroe is a guy that's built to get outside in space and run away from people. He is a deer. Taysom Hill is a tank. I don't think Jalen Milroe is an ideal tush-push, quarterback sneak kind of player. Can he do it? Sure. But his body type, I don't think is really built for taking the crunching hits that you would if you're going to be going in the middle of the line against a bunch of really big interior defenders. So I don't really see a Taysom Hill comparison with Jalen Milroe. What I do see is, could he be an effective short yardage player in his own right? Different utilization than Taysom Hill. Yeah, of course. He's got a lot to offer in that kind of role. I would think about him more as, this is kind of an odd thing to say, but a wildcat quarterback. Now, he's just a quarterback too, but he's kind of the ultimate wildcat quarterback in that a lot of guys that play wildcat quarterback were quarterbacks in like high school or, can kind of throw it a little bit, but they're really just in there to run the ball. Jalen Milroe would be a legitimate guy who is at least as much of a threat with his legs as he is with his arm, maybe more so, but also is in consideration for an early pick as a quarterback. So I think if you're just thinking about him as a standard wildcat quarterback and not as a Taysom Hill bruising interior player, that could be a really valuable package, because one of the things I brought up that I think even when I talked to Mike McDonald about it, he was not aware of. If you look at the 4 teams that finished in the NFC and AFC championship, the last 4 teams alive in the NFL this year, they finished 1, 2, 3, and 4 in fourth down conversion rate. Fourth down is a massively important down. It is increasing in importance in the NFL as more teams go for it. And Mike McDonald's already shown a propensity to want to go for it. They just have not had the short yardage weapon to do it. And Clint Kubiak has talked about the fact, when I asked him about why he was effective in short yardage, he brought up Taysom Hill as a real weapon that they had to work with. So there's a lot of signs pointing to the Seahawks wanting, understanding, and valuing a player that can help them in short yardage situations. So I think all of that makes sense, whether that's Jalen Milroe, whether they're willing to burn a first round pick, trading up into the second, like high second round, wherever it would have to be to get a Jalen Milroe. I don't know. That's not necessarily my ideal outcome, but it is one of the questions. I don't think anybody can say with certainty that the Seahawks aren't going to do that. And we just have to wait and see. But it's not exactly what I would do. If the Seahawks, where I could start stomaching the Seahawks taking a player like that, would be one of their picks in the second round. That would not be my first choice. I'd rather them not do that. But if they took Jalen Milroe, is that a more defensible pick than Zach Charbonnet in the late second round? Yeah, it is. I mean, the positional value at quarterback is just astronomical compared to other positions. And even if it's a long shot that Jalen Milroe ever becomes a truly capable franchise quarterback, he is a NFL athlete and will likely be able to be a valuable weapon for you in some way, somehow. So not what I want to happen, but I'm always going to try to be honest about what I think could happen as well. All right. Super Sauce XL says on his super chat, what percentage odds do you estimate the Hawks take a defensive line or defensive end at 18? Well, I've been doing my own. I participate in this draft prediction game, and I was filling out my picks yesterday, and I'm gonna have to go back. I know I'm gonna redo it a few times. By the way, you can redo yours all the way up until the draft, and then I will lock it once the draft starts. As of right now, my current pick is that the Seahawks are going to take Shamar Stewart at 18. That could be really wrong. There's, they got DeMarcus Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu, and they've got Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. They've invested a second-round pick in back-to-back drafts on the edge rush position. Does it really make sense to take another? Maybe not. But I have Shamar Stewart as one of the guys with blue chip potential, even though his floor, I think, is much lower than that. And I just can't imagine. I said this on Real Hawk Talk the other night. I watched Mike McDonald and John Schneider on the field at the Senior Bowl following around the offensive linemen, and they walked over to the same scrum of all the other, scouts and coaches and GMs that were surrounding the 1v1 pass rush drills, mainly because you're watching the offensive linemen. But Shamar Stewart was the best player out there. And I can't imagine that did not get the attention of Mike McDonald and that he didn't start dreaming about what he could do with the guy that has that kind of skill set. So I know about the production. I know all that. So you don't have to tell me again that he has no production in college. I'm well aware. I'm just telling you that it's not crazy that could be the direction they go. But to your question, in percent odds, I don't know that there's a lot of other guys that really warrant a pick at 18 at that position group. So I'd say the odds are like 20%, 25% at best that they go that direction at 18. Good question. All right. One other bit of news. The Seahawks were reported to have by, I think, Aaron Wilson, that Adam Prentice, the fullback, came in for a visit. Adam Prentice, if you remember, go back and find my fullbacks episode. You can find that. I go through the fullbacks that were going to be potential free agents. Adam Prentice played fullback for the New Orleans Saints last year with Clint Kubiak, with John Benton. So it always seemed like that was a likely outcome that he would rejoin them here. Even though Adam Prentice is no great shakes as a fullback, it at least establishes a floor for the position and means that the Seahawks don't have to go into the draft feeling like they need to get a fullback. Now, I still think there's a chance that they don't sign Adam Prentice and that they do go into the draft. And then if they don't get someone, then they go back to Prentice, because I'm not sure there's a lot of demand for his services. So that's at least a little bit of news on that front. Obviously, we've talked about draft prospects there. There's Jake Bringingstool, the tight end from Clemson, who could end up being a fullback. You've got Jalen Conyers, who's played tight end. Wildcat quarterback could also potentially be a fullback. JJ Pegues, the defensive tackle, who's also played Wildcat quarterback and fullback. There's a few interesting names. Even Cam Skattebo, he's a little light, obviously, and he's really a running back. But given how much that guy likes and seeks contact, I still think that it makes some sense for them to consider him as more of a weapon at the fullback position that can do more than the typical fullback. Kyle Juszczyk, for what it's worth, he's 235 pounds. And Cam Scadaboo is like 216. I think, Cam Scadaboo could put on 10 pounds if he needed to. I don't think it's crazy. So we'll see what happens there. Last thing I'll just say, the Aaron Rodgers news, that he's still contemplating retirement. The Steelers are in a wild position right now. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't go to the Steelers, DK Metcalf forced a trade to catch passes from Mason Rudolph in Pittsburgh. That is I'm just in the alternate universe where Sam Darnold does not agree to go to the Seahawks and he goes somewhere else. Just imagine the Seahawks literally could be talking about Drew Lock as their starter right now. They definitely could be talking about Aaron Rodgers. The expectation was that it would have been Aaron Rodgers if Sam Darnold was not there. So really, really glad that Sam Darnold is the guy, and looking forward to seeing how that all plays out. All right, so I'll be back tomorrow with Jeff Simmons for Seahawks Saturday. And then, as I said, Sunday, we have the Seahawks Draft Roundtable with Rob Staten and Griff Sturgeon, See Mike Spin Move. That will be great. And then we'll keep counting you down. Monday is when we will have the John Schneider and Mike McDonald press conference. I will be getting some interviews, hopefully, with Seahawks scouts and other folks in the front office. And when those drop, I will let you know, and we'll play those. So a lot of good stuff coming. Give the show a like, click subscribe. We are a couple hundred subscribers away on YouTube from 18,000 subscribers. Would love to get you up there. And then over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you could give us a 5-star review, I would really, really appreciate it. If you don't want to give a 5-star review, reach out to me and let me know why, and we can talk through it. All right. Take care. Have a great rest of your Friday. I'm Brian Nemhauser. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care.